Welcome to Singled Out, your ninth best gaming podcast. Please stand by.
Firefight when there's no goblins in it.
Well, there are some goblins in it. There's a goblin. There's a
marauders, but they're kind of like orcs, aren't they? Really, rather than goblins, aren't they?
I like to think that the orcs are the goblins are the leaders, and then the marauders sort of follow them around.
I want the goblins to be the guys up in those big sort of suits they have.
Oh, so they are. So there's the grunt bots, which do have goblins inside.
The Rippers.
Oh no, the Rippers. No, they are. They're the unless they're goblins with massive heads. And
it's basically the version of sort of four people in a trench coat, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that's what it is.
So Firefight's coming out like soon.
Yeah, April 19th.
And it looks quite exciting. It's second edition, isn't it, nominally? Is that correct?
Yeah, so it's the second edition, although actually I guess there's so many changes compared to first edition.
Yeah, that's what I said. It's kind of like first edition, really? Or
yeah.
Really? Not really. I mean, calling it the second edition suggests that it builds upon a game that's around a lot, or it's very similar to, but it's not, is it really?
No, I'd say I guess it's comparable to Dead Zone first and second, when I guess there was some stuff in common there. There was commonality there where obviously you had the grids in second edition and in first, but actually the game was totally different, I think. So it's probably more like that, I guess. So yeah, second edition in name, but actually pretty much a completely new game from the ground up.
Oh, we are recording now, by the way.
That's fine. I seem weird. That's why I'm doing you sensible answers.
Yeah. This is Rob. Rob is a Mantic person. I don't even know what your job is, to be honest, Rob.
Oh, it changes all the time. Let's say today I'm community manager.
Community manager. Okay. Yeah. So Rob's basically in charge of describing Mantic in positive terms to the world, and talking about the launch of Firefight, which is coming out in April. Like as you said, it's a sci-fi skirmish game. Well, say skirmish, not sort of a
squad based
28mm, isn't it? Game. So what is Firefight, and where's it set, and what's going on with it and stuff?
Okay, wow, you got that opening with the big questions there.
Well, yeah, explain to me the entire game, and I can put on mute for half an hour.
So Firefight, like we said, is a squad based like sci-fi war game, pretty much, and it's playable for about 40 to 50 miniatures, depending upon what faction you take. And then you're on a 4x4 table, and then there's all different scenarios and things like that. And pretty much you're trying to destroy each other. In terms of where it's set, it is set in our Warpath universe. So that's like the collective term for all our sci-fi kind of games. So from Overdrive to Star Saga to Firefight, Dead Zone, and up to Warpath. They're all set in this kind of Warpath universe, and it's not sort of like there's always war, sort of dark and moody. It's
kind of shiny, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it is in some areas. So it's basically, you imagine like humanity's gone a bit mad, capitalism has won the day, and in the future now corporations own entire planets or entire solar systems pretty much. And they exploit these solar systems for their resources, and they have their own standing armies in the case of the GCPS. But of course, as they have reached further out into the stars, they've come across different alien races and come into conflict with those. So Firefight tells those bigger conflicts, whereas Dead Zone is the smaller sort of urban skirmishes. This is like the slightly bigger, like full-on kind of warfare, when you've got like lots of kind of squads all fighting against each other for a different objective, basically.
So looking through the rules, it's interesting how it works out. The main premise of the game is it's squad based, as you said. A few things stood out to me. First of all, the way you sort of Well, I'll start on the bigger scale first of all. So first of all, the game is based upon alternate activations.
Yeah.
So it's you move a squad, they move the squads, and you sort of take it in turns till you're all done. There's command point in it, so you get a pool of them per turn, which can be dependent upon your leader, as well as basically what you roll. You can roll them each turn, and you can spend them to do various janky things like double activate different 2D units at once and use some unique powers to their sort of army. For example, orders to make your men move, shoot, move, for example, that sort of thing. And also the fact that the measurement, so even at squad based, everything's kind of measured from a leader, isn't it? So like if you've got say a squad of five soldiers, you measure the distance from the leader, and the other people around them basically aren't really used for any sort of measurements.
Yeah, that's right. So that comes down to, as we sort of said, this is Firefight Second Edition, and I think one of the issues we found with Firefight First Edition was really that was sort of, there was a Warpath Kickstarter basically where Mantic at the time was creating like this big, large scale war game with movement trays. It's a bit more like Kings of War, I guess, sci-fi Kings of War. And some people were a bit like, oh, actually, I wish there was a smaller version that stood in between Warpath and Dead Zone. And then, so I think, as far as I recall, during the Kickstarter, Firefight was sort of created as part of that. But I think the problem is that the rules for Warpath 1 went from Warpath down rather than from Dead Zone up. So if you imagine the most logical place for people to start in the sci-fi stuff is probably with Dead Zone. They would get Dead Zone. They would then want to move up to Firefight. And a lot of the time they were like, wait a minute, these rules aren't anything like I'm used to. This unit behaves in a totally different way. So with Firefight Second Edition, we thought, well, actually, let's rip it all up, go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, we'll assume that people have got into Dead Zone. I've got quite a lot of miniatures, and then like, oh, actually, I'd quite like to now scale it up with 20 or 30 more, get myself a cool vehicle, and then play from there. So with that in mind, we really wanted to make sure it played really fast. And one of the big things from Dead Zone is obviously you've got the grids, so it's grid-based movement and measuring, which is super quick, and that helps it be quick. So we wanted to kind of replicate that in some way. Couldn't do it with grids, so that's where we came up with this idea that, okay, do all the measurements from the leader, so you quickly can move them around, take line of sight from them, and do that. So that was a reason for doing that method of movement.
Yeah, so basically you move your leader, say if your leader wants to move forward and shoot, basically move the leader, and then everyone sort of teleports to within 3 inches of him, don't they, effectively?
Yeah, so you keep them in coherency. So as units get bigger, so because what you can do is, although it's typically you'll find that you're in squads of 5, and in their unit profiles they'll say, okay, it's a squad of 5, but then you can actually add more to them. So when you've got horde armies, you can pay extra to, say like the Veermin, for example. You can actually get a squad of 5 stalkers, and then you can pay, can't remember how many points it is now, let's say it's 10 points to keep adding more and more stalkers to them. And then if you do get over 10 models, then you've got a coherency of 6 inches, because obviously it's quite hard to get them all near the leader. But even so, you're still moving the leader and then kind of charging forward the rest of your miniatures.
I'm glad you mentioned Kings of War, because one thing that I love about Kings of War is how fast it is, but also there's a lot of meaningful decisions you can tactical decisions you can take, but also it's so quick. A 6-turn game, you're looking at an hour per person. I mean, with the tournament we went to recently, of course, 1,000 points, and it was quarter of an hour each, was it?
In the last round, it was 15 minutes each. Okay,
that was probably a bit too short, a bit too fast. But the other rounds were like 25 minutes a player. And there was even as a small game, for context purposes, 1,000 points Kings of War, where games normally 2,000 or 200-300 thereabouts.
Yeah.
But 1,000. So in some games, I think scaling it down wouldn't work so well. But I always found that even the small points games, Kings of War, it was fast and meaningful.
Yeah.
One problem I have with a lot of sort of sci-fi games on the market, especially the big one, really, is that you move and fire. It's like, what am I actually doing other than moving forward and rolling dice? And looking through Firefight is quite interesting, because first of all, it being alternate activations is very good, because you always can respond to someone else. Also, you have quite a tight sort of set of scenarios, so it's all about controlling the board and controlling, but also the way that assaults work, because assaults basically sort of close combat in the game. I find it interesting how if you move forward and attack someone, that burns up their activation. So if you attack a unit first, they're done for the turn. So you can do clever things like sort of effectively knock a unit out of the activation order, control a bit of the board, and sort of control space. And your opponent, because your opponent can still activate their models, they can respond to it in kind. And I think the back and forth makes it very interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Everything is we really want it to be dynamic because, like you say, if it was just sort of I go, you go, there'd be nothing worse than sitting back and watching your army.
What you're doing is rolling. What you're doing is rolling out to each other at that point, right?
Yeah. So we wanted to always avoid that. So alternate activations is always a big thing, and also, and you mentioned these earlier, this idea of the command points as well. So that's a little bit like if you've played Vanguard, where we've got the power dice. You roll your leader generates dice, and then you also get kind of 3 standard dice as well per turn. You roll those, that generates your command point. So say you've got 6 points, you can then spend them in the turn to do special orders. So some of them will be unique to your faction. So for example, the Veermen, their ones are all about getting in close to the enemy and attacking because that's what they're good at, whereas the enforcers are more about improving their shooting. So that's one way where you can sit there and respond to what your opponent is doing. Because if you're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't like the look of this flank. Okay, well, I'm going to use my orders over this side and do that. You've also got like commander orders as well, and they are specifically where if you've got a commander model, you can run them up or run them behind another unit, kind of trigger your command aura. And some of them will be instant effects, and then others will be a bit like auras. So you've got a bubble of kind of their influence where it might be that people get better at shooting or people get better at combat when they're near them. So that does help it to be, a little bit more responsive rather than just kind of sitting back and waiting to get killed. So you can react.
Yeah, I think nothing worse than sort of sitting back and seeing your opponent take your toys off. I mean, a lot of the guns in Firefight are relatively short ranged. I think the guns longer than 24 inches is kind of rare. In fact, most of them shorter than that. I mean, the average sort of rifle like gun is like an 18 or 12 inch range gun. So I mean, you're going to get chances to respond to things rather than having your toys taken off the first turn where opponent looks at you and rolls dice.
And a bit like you were talking about a bit like the assaults as well, because you were saying about how you can purposely charge someone in, and then they've got the option of doing an assault reaction. So that could be something like firing, running away, or something like that. But once they've done that, that's their turn. They're marked as activated as well. Yeah,
assaults are really powerful. Like it, some way seems to be like an assault-based game because you can force opponent to run away off objectives to the controlling, which is quite a big part of the game, controlling objectives and stuff. And it does activation. Then again, once you've assaulted yourself, you're then prone to get assaulted back.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because you do fight. So if you charge into combat, you get to fight first. So I would roll all my dice, but then if you survive, you get to fight back as well. So you could actually kind of weaken the opponent as if you kind of manage to survive.
And then you could do cunning things like, you can maybe shoot someone first with a unit and then spend a command point to take another activation straight away afterwards, and then use them to assault the unit you've shot at, and or use the double activation to respond back to an assault. There's lots of different things you can do back and forth in terms of spending command points to sort of have the initiative in a certain situation.
Yeah, and you've also got two, so a bit like Dead Zone. If you've played Dead Zone, in Dead Zone you can do 2 short actions or 1 long action a turn. So that might be a long action is something like a sprint. So a sprint, if you sprint into combat, that then counts as a charge and you get bonuses. But obviously what you can do is you can do 2 short actions. Now you can't repeat the same one, so you can't do 2 shoots. But what you could potentially do is you could shoot at a unit as 1 short action and then use another short action to advance. And basically, as soon as you advance into contact with an enemy, you start a combat. So what you could do is you could shoot at them, weaken them, and then kind of move in for the kill with an assault action. So you've got that option as well if you're close enough.
So who are the armies in this this world then? Who do we have?
So there's 7 armies at launch. You've got I'm always bound to forget one, so I'm going to count them on my fingers. You've got Asterians. Asterians are this kind of ancient race. I guess they're comparable to space elves, I guess. And what they do is they use a lot of mechs and droids.
They're kind of space high tech. I wouldn't call them space elves as such because they're not particularly similar to anything else I've seen in the armies, but they're sort of allies of different races and very high tech.
Very high tech. What they do is because
A lot of
there's not
remotes,
many
robots and things, isn't it?
Yeah, because there's not many of them left. They have these things called ciphers, which the Asterian people are up in the kind of ships in orbit, kind of controlling them mentally, while the robots do the fighting for them, so they don't die, so they don't put themselves in danger. So you've got those Asterians, and then they kind of ally with the Matsudan, who are these big sort of like sumo wrestling space lizards.
So they kind of got sort of ally races, have they? Sort of vassal races they have under their banner, basically.
Yeah, so the Matsudan's an interesting one because the Matsudan was sort of tricked by the GCPS, and so kind of not a lot of the races in Firefight are kind of in constant war with each other. Basically, what they can treaty, and they can, they probably have trade routes and that sort of stuff. So the Asterians probably do trade with the humans. So they don't want all out kind of open warfare, but they've sort of kind of tricked the Matsudan to work with them as well, and potentially kind of get in the combat with them. So that's quite interesting how that works, that dynamic. You've got the Forge Fathers. So they are, they are dwarfs pretty much.
Pretty much. I mean, they are dwarfs.
What they specialize in is mining, and they will pretty much go into a planet, absolutely strip it of all the resources, and potentially even destroy the planet as well. So they don't really care. They are sort of very much power hungry, resource kind of hungry as well. Very good at technology, heavily armored as you'd expect, I guess, from the dwarfs. And they've got sort of the big tanks and those kind of things that you'd like to see in a dwarf list. GCPS, so they were the ones we mentioned earlier. That's humanity. So a lot of the corporations have these standing armies on planets, and often the GCPS are the first ones to kind of deal with a conflict. So that could be the local population decides, hey, wait a minute, we don't like the humanity being here, we're going to kill them. Or they could get invaded by someone like the Asterians or the Forge Fathers. You've got the Enforcers, who are more like superhumans. So you've got an organization called the Council of Seven, who is in charge of the GCPS.
So the GCPS is the sort of humanity's sort of sphere of all the different corporations that kind of run humanity, basically.
Exactly. So, let's say in the future, Coca-Cola would probably have its own army, because they would want to go, and they'd have a planet where they're probably making all their futuristic Coca-Cola, and they would have an army to protect their factories. And that's going
to happen as well. I look forward to Disney having SWAT teams. That's going to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, Disney Dead Zones.
God.
So whereas the GCPS is sort of like the standard humans, the Enforcers are more the superhumans. They're in these kind of really high-tech suits. They have slightly better technology as well, better at shooting, and that's because they're typically sent in to dead zones by the Council of Seven to deal with outbreaks of the plague.
So what are dead zones then, and what's the plague?
So dead zones are the plague. The reason why this goes back to the original dead zone. The plague is this really kind of infectious disease that turns people into bloodthirsty monsters, pretty much. No one's quite sure where it's come from. It's really contagious. So what was happening is when kind of the GCPS was encountering these, typically they would start with they discover a big monolith, and then the next minute everyone's getting sick and turning into monsters. So the only answer to that was to literally lock down the planet and stop the plague kind of getting off the planet, because they still have some intelligence, not a lot, but they can still kind of potentially operate like spaceships and stuff to get off the planet, which would then infect other ones. So the Council of Seven had the Enforcers, who were then used to go in and eradicate the plague. So they're kind of like the kind of strong arm of the council sent in to deal with major threats like the plague. But then actually now dead zones are kind of declared for all sorts of reasons. It could be that, yes, you've got a plague outbreak. It could be that you've got something like the vermin, who are like the space rats. You could have an infestation of those. And in that case, they would close down the planet. And it's not always the planet. It could be that they close down a continent or something like that. So, dead zones are kind of an opportunity for people to exploit whatever resources are left when the dead zone is declared. Because once it's declared, it's wiped off all the star maps. It no longer exists. So it's pretty much fair game for people to take advantage of.
Oh, so it gets quarantined, so people
Yes.
to sort of scavenge it, basically.
Yeah, but its containment protocols are kind of initiated, and then after that, once that's done, then anyone can kind of go and try and find, let's say there's secret weaponry there, they can try and get those and that sort of stuff. So yeah, the dead zones are a free for all pretty much of people to start fighting.
Other armies, we have the Marauders.
Yeah, so the Marauders are the collection of greenskins. So
goblins.
I mean, it's mainly goblins.
Mainly
with
goblins,
some,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but we've just done the new hard plastic Marauders, so the Orc Commandos. They were something that had been asked for a long time, and previously they'd been in PVC for Dead Zone, and now we've done the hard plastics for those, which is really cool. And actually, the Marauders used to be used by the corporations as like mercenaries, and then there was this big thing called the Mandrake Rebellion when it all kicked off and the orcs nearly got wiped out. But anyway, that's a longer story for why they're doing that. The Plague, like I've said, they're the kind of bloodthirsty monsters, so they're sort of like your beasties, your gribblies in that one. And then finally you've got the Vermin, who are the space rats, who have all this kind of experimental technology full of chemicals and stuff that would kill a human normally, but somehow they seem immune to it.
Okay, so there's quite a few factions at launch there, really. We'll say at launch, it's been out technically for a while, hasn't it, really?
Yeah, I think that the good thing is because I think it's fair to say that Firefight First Edition didn't necessarily hit the ground running. Let's say, it didn't get the kind of, not enough people played it, I think. So for a lot of people, these are totally new. This is a totally new launch with totally new armies that they've never seen before, and that's what we're seeing actually from the kind of reaction we're getting so far. People are like, oh wow, I didn't really realize. I sort of, maybe people had heard of Dead Zone, but they didn't realize actually how fleshed out the rest of the range was. It's actually, the sci-fi hard plastics we've got are kind of comparable to Kings of War.
I mean, some of the models are fantastic, like the Vermin tunneling machines, or fantastic sort of giant drills they've got. Absolutely superb models.
Yeah, and that's hard plastic, and that's one of those things that kind of before people were buying it for other game systems, I think, rather than actually using it for Firefight.
And some of the flyers, like the Enforcer flyer they have, some of the flying vehicles, I think all the factions have, look really, really cool, kind of sleek, sort of flying machines. And I guess are they all hard plastic or some of them resin?
No, they're all pretty much all the vehicles are hard plastic. So from the Enforcer Interceptor to the GCPS Mule and the Hornet, they're all hard plastic. And I think that was another reason for us wanting to kind of do a second edition, because although we were using a lot of the hard plastic infantry in Dead Zone, we had all these really awesome vehicles that were kind of just sitting there on the shelf and weren't really doing a lot with them. So we thought, actually, let's get these on the tabletop and actually get people playing with them.
Yeah, we're looking at the game basically. I look for things in war games like counterplay and speed, and I think it's got both those. The rules are fairly simple. Like, I'm looking at the rulebook here. I think the rulebook total is get rid of all the fluff parts of the book, so I can count the page numbers more easily. I think you're looking at about 35 pages for the rules. That includes everything, including the scenarios.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think I think we like to have fairly simple rules. You mentioned Kings of War. Actually, it doesn't take long to explain a game of Kings of War. I think what you've got to get good at it, you then got to get used to things like flanks and positioning. And I think that'll be the same in this one. It won't take long to explain it, but it'll be how you use your command orders, how you use the activations, and that sort of stuff is where the sort of skill will come, rather than you sort of burying your head in a book and trying to work out how to play all the time.
So looking at the book here, the scenario book says you're looking at between 1,000 and 1,250 points for 4x4 table. So you're looking at 1,000 points, or 1,250 for 4x4 table. So I did a points breakdown of box contents. The starter box, both armies about 360. So that's fine. That's wrong. 860.
Yeah.
Depending on what you use for sort of weapon loadouts and things, that's assuming you have a commander in the unit by doing some proxying. If you put a flyer in there as well, you've got then almost 1,000 points. I think it's like 980 points ish.
Yeah, I think in the book, in the starter set, we've got a little starter guide, which kind of does tell you what armies to build. And yeah, I think it does come up to about 850.
So you're looking at quite a good chunk of the army actually there and then. If you're looking at that sort of game, I mean, you can play on a 6x4 for larger points value. But I think, not everyone's got a sort of a 6x4 table lying around nowadays.
No, I personally, I like it. And I did play testing at 4x4. I like that sort of size of a game. And I think that always, so typically if you're playing like a 1,000-point game, it's maybe 90 minutes to finish the game, I'd say, roughly, which is still quite quick. I think it is quick actually compared to some other ones. And obviously, as soon as you start to scale up above that, then yeah, the game does become, for probably 1,500 points, it's probably more like 2 hours, that sort of thing.
Yeah, games can get crazy length after a while, and I think maybe it's me being a sort of 40-year-old dad now, but anything longer than 2 hours I can't bother anymore. It's like
I know what you mean. I like that sort of, to me, that sweet spot is an hour to an hour and a half, and I think that's great because potentially if you stay at a club, you've got room there for a couple of games.
Yeah.
Or in an afternoon you could easily do 2 games, which is great, and I think that's what you want because, like you were saying there, I'm the same. I don't get a lot of time to play games, so when I do play them, I want to maximise the amount of time I've got and get 2 or 3 games in.
So that's the launch in April. So what are the plans after that?
Yeah, so obviously we've got the kind of initial launch, and that actually from launch because we've got such a big back catalogue, everything's available. All the vehicles, everything for all 7 factions. So I think once we've got the launch app kind of done, I think then it will be making sure that people are playing it, going out to stores, doing demos, going out to shows, doing demos as well, just to get people playing. And then we're already looking at next year of potentially new hard plastics. I guess that's the most obvious thing, to do new armies. There is another army that has been in playtesting but isn't in the rule book, and I think we'd like to release that one next year as well. So nice try. So you nearly got me there, Andrew.
Hey.
I tell you, well, no, I'm not going to tell you. I know you. But yeah, I mean that was that. So I think we'd love to expand the range with different models, because obviously the great thing is when we put them in this, well, it means they can also go into Dead Zone as well. So it's a nice virtuous circle where you get new stuff for both games as well, and can kind of either people jump in a Dead Zone or they can jump in a Firefight. Because I think a big thing for me was I played a lot of Kings of War, and obviously we played at that tournament. And when I've been doing my Goblin army, I'll do a horde of goblins. That's 40 miniatures I've got to paint. And I do that. That's one unit worth 125 points. And I'm like, wow, that's, if you're playing 2,300 points, that's not even 10% of your army. So it was a bit of a revelation for me when I was doing Firefight, because I've never done a big sci-fi game before, when I painted up 40 enforcers, and I was like, wow, that's almost it. That's kind of it for my infantry options.
I mean, 40 enforcers is probably more than you even need. I mean, the box set has how many? It has 20 enforcers in it.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's like 860 points you're looking at.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So I think for me now it's actually, it's not. Whereas I think starting a new Kings of War army feels like a bit of a commitment, because you're like, right, okay, I'm going to knuckle down, I'm going to get on with it. Actually, for Firefight, I've got a Veerman army, I've got my enforcers, and I'm now looking at Marauders and thinking, well, I probably can do these. It's quite easy.
Yeah, I think it's that sort of nice sweet spot between having a large scale game, right, but not being too big. You're not going to. I think it'd be very unlikely, even for a horde based army like GCPS or other ones, where you're going to be looking at Marauders, we're looking at 100 men. I don't think it's going to happen.
No, I mean, I was playing with the Veerman yesterday, and I had 850 points and didn't really have much of the big stuff in. It was mainly like troops, and I think that was about 50 models, and that's a horde army, but that was 850 points. So I don't think you'll be struggling to get to 100, I think. Yeah,
I mean, obviously the expectation for any war game is to have multiples of everything, so you can do different army selections and things. But even then, I mean, the army selection is quite flexible, isn't it, in terms of how it works?
Yeah, so the way it works is you've basically got troops, specialists, and support, and then commanders. So commanders you always start with one free commander that you don't have to unlock, and then after that it's troops unlock specialists, and then a combination of troops and specialists can unlock support. So you basically allocate them to how you want to do that.
So the contact support's basically like tanks, isn't it?
Yes.
Big walking robot-y things, flying vehicles, that sort of thing.
Yeah. And specialists are more like snipers, kind of units that like maybe like heavy combat, like, you know, ones that are really good at combat. And then your troops are your bog standard infantry. Tends to be, that's where you're having 5 or 10 in a unit. And then your commanders, yeah, they're the leaders. And you can have multiple commanders, and the benefit of that is you'll get multiple dice, you'll get more command dice, but also when you're doing your command orders or issuing faction orders, the more commanders you've got, the more points you've got, kind of more positions, you've got to issue those orders from.
Yeah, so it looks really interesting. Like, I think there's gonna be a lot of play in it. I think there's a lot of scope having a good army that's painted, you know, not too long a time. Like, as you mentioned, Kings of War. Like, I'm painting a second Kings of War army right now, and it's basically a year per army for me, I think.
Yeah, I'm the same. I tend to, for Kings of War, I like to do one army project a year, and I mean normally that army project is more goblins, but sometimes it can be actually. Like last year I did salamanders. This year I think I'll probably actually do Firefight. But yeah, I've done Force of the Abyss, dwarfs, all sorts for Kings of War.
Yeah, I reckon I could crack out a Firefight army maybe a month.
Yeah, I mean, I did my enforcers in lockdown. Lockdown was great for hobbying for me. I got loads done, but I think that took me maybe a couple of months. Once I'd got my paint scheme sorted down, it was about that. So yeah, not long at all, really.
How much terrain do you have in this game?
So I guess it does depend on the scenario, because some scenarios will specify that you need buildings, but generally it's not as terrain heavy as something like Dead Zone, where, you know, the terrain is almost like the third player in some ways, because it's so integral to the game. In terms of terrain, I'd probably say it's a bit like Kings of War, you know, 2 blocking obstacles, some terrain, some obstacles to use for cover. But yeah, it's not overly dense. I think if you've played other sci-fi games, you've probably got enough terrain, I think, for this one.
Yeah, I think the only sci-fi game I can think of that would have more terrain than this one is probably going to be Infinity, where you need like terrain everywhere, otherwise you're going to die. But I think this one, I think certainly, terrain's impactful and meaningful. At the same time, it doesn't dominate the game. I think it's
exactly. Yeah, because you can go inside buildings and you can shoot. You know, you can shoot from buildings. You can use them as sort of defensible fortifications. But then also you can do things like there's a move called Hit the Dirt, where even if there's no cover, you can actually, you imagine, because yes, we all play on battlefields that are totally flat, but obviously if you were really fighting out in the battlefields, there'd be little hills and all sorts. So if you can hit the dirt, you are in cover, so there isn't that reliance on okay, I always need to have some terrain that acts as cover. You can make it up.
Are there any events planned for it anytime soon?
Yes, I think actually one of the guys down south has already got like one of the first Firefight tournaments organised, and I think once we've got the launch done, I think we'll look at doing something at Mantic HQ, because we've got enough room there to do a small event. We were talking actually about having kind of a launch weekend, and that might be that we'll try and get our Pathfinders out to different stores, you know, ones that are local to them, to make sure people can do demos and take it for a spin.
So there we go. That's Firefight. It looks pretty interesting in terms of its speed of play, sort of the way you can counteract each of the game plans by interrupting activations and reacting to things. And not too many models, and lots of guns, so you can shout sort of noises at each other.
Yep.
We're going pew pew, everything else.
Yeah, daka daka daka.
Daka daka. Is that copyrighted? Daka daka daka.
I don't think so. We didn't get told off for using it in one of our Facebook posts, so I think it's fine.
Is that the way of finding out, is it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
yeah.
we didn't get sued last time for saying this thing, so that's fine.
Yeah, I'm sure it's fine.
It's probably fine. I mean, maybe the season system will be in the post.
It could be. Yeah, I'll probably get back to work this week, and there'll be something waiting on my desk for me. So
like 2 very angry lawyers looking at you.
Until then, I'll live in ignorance.
Okay. Well, anything else to say about this game to justify it?
To justify it, wow, let's go ahead. No, I think
Bit deep,
we've
isn't it?
covered it all. I think this is if you want a fast-paced sort of tactical war game where you haven't got your head buried in a book, or you haven't got your head buried in multiple books potentially. You know, there's only 2 rule books. You've got 2 books here, which is the rule book and the force list book, and that contains all the armies.
Well, also presumably sorry to interrupt you. Presumably,
Fine.
there'll also be the Easy Army is available for it.
Yeah, so Easy Army is in testing now. So
So that
we'll
if you
have
want to
that
play that,
launched.
basic Mantic has effectively a army list generator online, which is very good.
Yeah, and that'll be ready for launch. Well, the launch. Let's call it the launch window, just in case it's not available day one. But that's being tested at the minute, and yeah, I think, and that adds to it as well. You know, you can have your army list there. But yeah, we really wanted to create something that's fun to play, and you know, gives us plenty of room in the future to expand it with different stuff and different forces. So yeah, keep an eye on it, and there's plenty more to come for Firefight.
Brilliant. On that bombshell, I'll say goodbye.
Goodbye to me.
Bye.
Bye.